I met Skrillex years ago, and this is the most interesting thing I learned when talking to him and basically asking him, how did you make it to where you are now? How did you become the Skrillex that we all know and love? Now, in 2014, I was touring. I put together my first ever countrywide tour, put everything together myself. It was a ton of work. I called it the Light Nearby Tour, quoting or kind of based off the quote that never fear shadows. It just means there's light shining somewhere nearby. And in addition, I worked on my debut album where I went to 10 major cities, made a song about each city that encapsulated that city in musical form. Bunch of cities around the country, like I said, 10. And one of them was Vegas. And as you can imagine, Vegas is Vegas. If you've never been, it's a legendary place. I love Vegas, right? And got to meet Skrillex backstage and kind of hung out with him for just a little bit. I'd say maybe like 10 minutes or so. I didn't really want to bother him at Excess nightclub. And like I said, I was able to talk to him for a little bit. I told him what I was doing. I put together like a van as well. This is like, I think way before a van life was a big thing. I literally bought a Ford Transit, reconverted it into like a mini apartment, lived out of it for the entire 10 months of this tour. So I was telling him all of this, everything I was doing. I was like, oh, like I'm a huge fan of yours. I gave him one of my demos. I guess I ended up hearing through a mutual friend who knows him that he ended up losing the demo, which in hindsight was definitely a good thing because in hindsight, it was actually pretty bad, the demo. But anyway, one of the things I asked him, like I said, is, well, I got to ask you, like, what did you do to get to where you were? I can't remember how I worded it, but I worded it in a very, like, kind of casual way, being like, hey, man, I'm a huge fan. I'm just curious, like, do you have any advice? Obviously, you're, like, crushing it right now, of course, with the DJ game. What did you do to get to where you are now? I'm just very curious because, I'm a very big go-getter as well. I work very hard, and I'm hustling nonstop, that kind of thing. And one thing he said to me, this is what he said that really struck out to me. And he said, look, he goes, what I did is I made music that other DJs wanted to play out live. I made music that had that intensity, that energy, that just hit the right way, that other DJs would want to perform out live. And then one thing led to another, and I kept getting better at music and blah, blah, blah. And that always struck me as a very interesting quote because I even remember hearing, obviously, a bunch of quotes I've heard from so many DJs. I've studied a lot. It's kind of interesting and fun to do, at least for me. I've studied a lot of different DJs of how did they make it. Like, did they start making music and then they blew up? Were they DJing and were getting popular with DJing and then they released like one single? Like, how did each DJ do it? And for example, I remember listening to David Guetta talk about this or read it somewhere that he said he will not make a song without picturing it in a DJ set first. That every song he makes with David Guetta has to be first pictured in a DJ set, and he's not going to release a song unless he knows he can DJ it out. And that kind of makes sense, right? Like, if let's say you only DJ house music, but you produce and make dubstep, that's a bit of a disconnect. And remember, and I think a lot of people forget this, if you are a musician, you are a business, and your product is your music, or your DJ performances, or your merch and stuff like that, right? But I think it's a good way to think of that because I know being like genreless is the thing to do right now. I know it's kind of like the cool thing to say. They'd be like, oh, I'm genreless. I don't have a genre. But I hate to say it, like touring managers and booking agents and everything, they look at you and say, okay, well, should they open for Excision, like say a bass artist, or should they open for Diplo, more of a hip hop or trap artist, right? Should they open for somebody like Grizz, who does more like future funk, glitch hop stuff, or should they open for Glitch Mob, which actually is now doing probably more drum and bass, industrial type stuff, right? Very different artists, and of course, even if you're genreless, you still have to be put somewhere on a lineup, even some festival stages, that kind of thing, right? So I think it's very important to think about yourself as an artist, the music you release, and how that portrays you as an artist with your style, and of course, how it portrays in a DJ set, like David Guetta said, right? And I think a lot of artists do kind of think like this, like they're like, oh, I produce Moomerton, I produce Tech House, I produce Glitch Hop and Future Funk, I produce X, Y, and Z, right? But the one thing that Skrillex said now, bringing it back to Skrillex, that really just always kind of stuck out with me is how do I make music that other DJs want to play out live? And the electronic music world is very unique in the sense that as a big DJ, even big DJs, you are kind of expected to play out other people's stuff. It's not necessarily a cop-out, I think, as more just the practice of electronic music. Like very few artists, I feel like, play only their own stuff. And again, you can argue this in the whole other video, like there's pros and cons to both. Like I know deadmau5 does a lot of only his own stuff. Rez does this. Pretty Lights does this. But I just saw Pretty Lights recently, actually in Colorado, and he had other people's songs mixed into it. And then we mix someone else's song that everyone knows. It's kind of cool to hear like your own stuff with your own song, right? And so many artists mix other people's stuff. And it's a huge thing in the DJing world and in the electronic world as well, right? And it's just super interesting because if you start approaching your music, and this is something that really changed once I heard that, right? Then I'm like, okay, well, how do I make music not only that I want to DJ out live, but as opposed to me thinking I, what if I think you? What if I think, okay, how could another DJ want to DJ this out loud? How could I make it in such a way? Because I'm not gonna lie, looking back on my old songs, and this is super important to be self-aware, right? I think it was the famous comedian Louis C.K. who said, self-love is great, but self-awareness is important. And I think it's important to be self-aware. And looking back at some of my songs, I'm like, I had a hard time mixing them. And it's like, if I have a hard time mixing my own songs in my own performances, that means other DJs are not even gonna try, right? So I think that really changed the game. I'm like, okay, how can I make other songs and other music that other DJs want to play it live? That way I can produce still what I want to produce, yet it's made in such a way that's just, whether I have to add in other elements, maybe even add in some type of like intro that's good for mixing, or even like an outro, but just kind of do something that allows other DJs want to play it out live. In addition, this also changed my mindset, which is a big one, for promo emails. Because back in the day, I used to be like, check out my track. It's wicked good. It's fire. Like, please, I probably didn't say it like that. like I said, like, oh, please check out my song. It's really good. I can't remember how I should probably check out my old promo emails. They're probably horrible. But like, I tried to send it to everybody. And then I was thinking, well, if I'm a big DJ, or if I'm a touring DJ, whatever, and I'm looking at these promo emails, I'm probably not thinking, is this song necessarily good? I'm thinking, can I use it? And so that's what was a big thing for me as well when it comes to promo emails, is now I started emailing DJs and other people. And I do this now, even so to this day, being like, hey, here's a record I just released. Here's the genre. I might even say the BPM. And I might be like, hey, it's been very useful for me in my DJ sets. I typically sometimes mix it in at this timestamp because it's really good. For example, I released recently a remix cover, I don't even know what the right word would be, of the dial-up sound of dial-up internet from like the 90s, the 56K modem. And I typically mix that song in or start it at the point where the dial-up sound starts, and it's only the dial-up sound, and then it mixes back into the actual record. So I said in that email, in the promo email, like, hey, just saying, this is how I mix it in, because it's kind of cool to like have a huge stop in your DJ set. You're like, and this is sometimes what I've done, I'm like, I'm experiencing technical difficulties, give me a second, hit play, and then it starts on the dial-up sound. So it's kind of like a little cheesy, but it's kind of fun to do, right? And I mentioned that in the email. I've noticed that does pretty well when I say, hey, not just this is a good song, listen to my song. It's me saying, here's how I think this song can be useful for your DJ set. Here's how I think you can mix it in. I'm hoping it's useful for your DJ set. And I found this has worked so much better to think you as opposed to I. I mean, I think this is important, I think, in life in general, with any kind of product or service, an entrepreneurship or business or pretty much anything. And I think it's also important in music too. Like, okay, like not only do I think this is a good song, but is this a song that other people will like? I think it's a good approach. But I think even taking that a step further, the one unique thing, I remember one of my friends who doesn't DJ, and I've said this before in other videos, I've gotten the best advice from people who are not actually into electronic music or they don't know anything about music, not even just EDM, but anything about music. And she said, well, Mark, can I ask you a question? I don't know the DJ thing. I don't know anything about this, but she was listening to one of my songs. I just want to get her feedback. She's a dancer, right? And I feel like dancers actually have a pretty good, just like general sense about song and rhythm, of course. And she's like, well, to me, I'm just curious, are you making this song for DJs or for listeners? And I'm like, well, what do you mean by that? She goes, well, I don't know. She goes, I don't know anything. She goes, but from my perspective, sometimes I feel like some songs I hear when it comes to the EDM world are meant to be listened to. But other songs, it seems like, are made in such a way that other DJs can use to play out live. And I just wanted to ask you, like, with your approach when it comes to this song you're showing me, or it was actually an album I was showing her, is this for DJs or listeners? And now I was like, I don't know why I never thought of it that way, because you could argue, like, yes, it's all kind of the same, right? But I'm like, she's got a point. That's a very interesting thing. And I think that's a really good approach to have. And of course, there is kind of like a balance. Like, of course, if you look at most, like, say, big room house songs, they're super square, 128 BPM. They have some type of kick drum in the beginning, kick drum at the end. So you have kind of like, I like to call it like the head and the tail of the track for mixing. You have everything kind of all going on 8-bar sections, so you can easily mix it in. So like big room house stuff, like very square, but like other genres, like there are some songs that are less mixable, and other ones that are more mixable, right? So this is a very unique, I think, approach to have. And I say this to a lot of musicians because if you start approaching and making your music when it comes to DJing, saying, hey, how do I make this that other DJs want to play out live, like Skrillex did? One thing I realized, which is so simple, yet, again, sometimes the most simple things are the easiest to overlook, is this is free promotion. I've had my songs played in bars, nightclubs. It's been featured all over the internet. I just cracked over 4 billion streams across all social media platforms and streaming platforms and everything in terms of views and TikTok stuff and YouTube stuff and God knows what, right? I've even had videos sent to me of people like raging to one of my songs at like a college party and stuff like that. So it's pretty cool to see. It's wild. And I've gotten tens of thousands of Shazams. I don't know if I've cracked over 100,000 Shazams yet. But to me, which is funny, and this goes back to this DJ thing, the Shazam counter, maybe I'll do a video about this, is one of the most underrated counters when it comes to your music, because it's not just a streaming service or Spotify that someone could kind of stumble upon, right? Somebody has to be at an event or something, they hear your music being played, and they're like, I like this song. They pull out their phone, they hit a button, they wait, and then your song pops up. So those tens of thousands of Shazams have been directly correlational with, one, someone playing my music out live, and two, someone liking it so much that they go to Shazam it. And if you think about it, like I've been saying this entire video, the way my song got played out live is because a DJ liked it so much, it got played out live. And I think that's a big thing to really start approaching. I know I'm driving this point home, but I just, especially with me being a former accountant, getting a business degree with a concentration in accounting, I really do look at my music career, and what I try to do is look at it through a business lens. I think that's a very smart approach. It's not perfect, but I think it's very smart to do. And I think as a result, I always think like, okay, well, I can either A, like any entrepreneur, like Shark Tank, think of Shark Tank, I can make a product that I like using, but what if I take a step back and say, okay, yeah, I might like this product, but how do we take a step back and think, how would other people like this product? As opposed to making a product for me, which I think is a good step in entrepreneurship, like how can I solve a need? How can I solve a need that I have? Think, how can I solve a need that other people have? Instead of thinking, I think of you. And again, bring this point straight back to Skrillex, like he said, because of him making those kind of songs, as we all know, like way back in the day, like dubstep was kind of like very reggae-ish. I don't use the word breakbeat, but there's some breakbeat type elements. It was not something you could, I think, easily mix into a song or have that energy or hit. Like, I don't say Skrillex made dubstep mainstream, although he did per se, but he made, I think, dubstep have this energetic feel that still kind of, I don't say uplifted everybody, that sounds a bit cheesy, but it gave it a whole other kind of vibe and energy that I think not a lot of other artists had before. And I know you could argue if that's true or not when it comes to like the OG dubstep legends, but like, I think he did something to it in such a way that kind of made it more like, it's almost, I look at what Skrillex did with dubstep is kind of similar to what Dylan Francis did with Moombahton. Moombahton used to be super aggressively world music and Latin based, which it still is. But Dylan Francis said, what if I took this, but made it a little more mainstream sounding, put more like big room elements into it, put more, high-end synths into it, put more stuff into it that maybe the mainstream public would like more. And now if you talk to a lot of people and you ask them, do you know what Moombahton is? A lot of them are like, yeah, no, Moombahton is such a specific genre. And I'd say because of Dylan Francis, also you do have like the legends like Munchie and David Nada and stuff like that. But when it comes to Moombahton, it really wasn't that well known at all until Dylan Francis said, how do I make this a little bit more mainstream? Because I really like it. So let's make it a little more mainstream. And I believe it was Master Blast that blew up Dylan Francis big time and the genre of Moombahton, making it a little bit more mainstream. And of course, with Skrillex, his remix of Cinema by Benny Benassi is kind of what did that. And then Scary Monsters and Nice Sprites kind of alongside that too. So like I said, bring this back. How can you make a song or make your music in such a way that other DJs want to play out live? How can you send those promo emails thinking, how could another DJ use this out live? And maybe even mention that in the promo email. Because remember, it's free promotion and everything. At the end of the day, like Skrillex said, the second you start thinking, and this is something I've been doing a lot since I heard this, and I always think this now as I'm making music, how can I change the I to you? Because once other people can start using your music and playing it out live, that's immediate free promotion and more people using your music, which is going to grow you as an artist.